Cowboys didn't just sip coffee on the frontier, they depended on it. Out on the dusty cattle trails, up in cold mining camps, and across lonely desert stations, coffee wasn't a luxury, it was survival fuel. But cowboy coffee wasn't brewed like anything you'll find in a fancy cafe today. It was rough, gritty, powerful, and often strong enough to make a horseshoe float, at least according to the old-timers. Behind that black, boiling pot swinging over a campfire lies a whole culture of frontier tricks, slang, and bizarre brewing methods most people have never heard about. And this is where the forgotten truth of cowboy coffee finally gets revealed. If you love learning about the real American Old West, make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave a comment down below, and tell me, would you have actually tried a cup of this stuff? Cowboy coffee has a split reputation. Some folks call it unforgettable in the best way. Others remember it as rough and murky. At its core, it's simple. Coarse grounds and water brought to a boil or left to steep in a pot or kettle. No filters, no gadgets. Prepared with care, ranch cook and YouTuber Kent Rollins says it can be remarkably smooth. Many modern trail cooks agree that controlled heat, fresh water, and proper settling make a big difference. Still, the drink is famous for being harsh and heavy when rushed. That image, coffee you could almost stand a spoon in, comes from hurried camp routines and overboiling. Historically, simplicity was the point. Chuckwagon cooks brewed coffee to keep trail crews alert and hydrated through long days of riding and camp chores. Coffee was a standard ration on cattle drives and in frontier camps. The equipment list matched life on the range: a kettle or pot, a fire, and maybe a spoon to stir. As publications like True West note, that's all a wagon cook needed. Time was tight. When you're feeding dozens of hungry workers, the priority is hot, plentiful, and caffeinated, often at the expense of finesse. That same stripped-down method is why cowboy coffee endures. Campers, backpackers, and overlanders still use it when they want a satisfying cup without machines, filters, or extra weight. For early cowboys, the stronger the coffee, the better. In the Old West, cowboy coffee was not viewed as a luxury drink. It was necessary daily fuel. Historical sources like True West point out that on long cattle drives, coffee was served at every meal, but also between meals and even during the night. Cowboys working night herd duty often drank coffee before riding out into the darkness, and again when they returned. It helped them stay alert and focused when responsibilities stretched across extremely long hours. This love for coffee wasn't limited to cattle hands. Travelers, pioneers, wagon trains, and settlers across the frontier relied on coffee just as much. Pioneer Julia Breyer once wrote that their coffee was a wonderful help during their journey west. Because they needed steady energy, cowboys preferred their coffee extremely strong, dark, and uncomplicated. They did not want weak coffee that tasted watered down. Camp cooks understood this expectation. Efficiency mattered as much as taste. According to historians, one common method was to leave the old grounds inside the pot and simply add new grounds on top for the next batch. This saved valuable time, and it made sure every bit of coffee was used to its fullest potential. Early recipes for cowboy coffee focused on strength, not taste. Cowboy coffee has a reputation problem partly because its methods clash with modern specialty coffee norms. Many frontier recipes called for bringing the pot to a rolling boil. Today, most baristas say that boiling extracts harsh flavors and flattens nuance. Some cowboy coffee advocates, however, argue the opposite, that a brief boil can lower perceived acidity and yield a smoother cup when handled carefully. The no-filter approach also worries people. Brewing grounds directly in the water and pouring into a cup can leave sediment, which many drinkers find unpleasant. Early ranch cooks focused on output and strength more than tasting notes. Historians note that one cook reportedly used about 175 pounds of beans in a single month to keep crews supplied. To meet expectations for intensity, some camps simply boiled the pot longer. Quantity and durability mattered on the trail. A colorful example appears in Western Words, A Dictionary of the Range, Cow Camp and Trail, 1945, cited by Sprudge. The old instruction reads, take 2 pounds of Arbuckle's coffee, add enough water to wet it, boil for 2 hours, then drop in a horseshoe. If the horseshoe sinks, the coffee isn't ready. The line is tongue-in-cheek, but it captures the era's preference for strong, straightforward coffee and the practical mindset behind it. Some early cowboys had to settle for coffee substitutes. Coffee earned a permanent place on the American table long before the Old West era. Its rise in popularity can be traced back to the American Revolution. Colonists rejected tea due to British taxation and began choosing coffee as a symbol of independence. Even after relations improved later on, Americans' preference for coffee only grew stronger. By the time the frontier era arrived, both cowboys and travelers valued coffee for its warmth and energy, especially on long days outdoors. There was a major challenge, though. Coffee was costly and difficult to access. It had to be shipped from the Caribbean and South America, which meant remote regions of the American West often lacked steady supply, according to historians. As a result, many cowboys, especially before the Civil War, sometimes relied on substitutes. They brewed coffee from whatever ingredients they could find locally, including okra seeds, roasted corn, rye, or bran. These alternatives didn't always produce a strong effect, but on a cold morning, a hot drink still lifted spirits and helped start the day with comfort. Cowboy coffee was always made with freshly ground beans. Cowboy coffee is sometimes remembered as thick and overly strong. However, it had one major advantage compared to the average office pot today. It was brewed from freshly ground beans. According to I Need Coffee, in the early 19th century, those beans were often freshly roasted as well. Because of that, a properly prepared cup of cowboy coffee on the trail was likely fresher in flavor than what many people drink in modern coffee shops. This wasn't due to gourmet culture. It was simply because pre-ground commercial coffee did not exist yet. Everyone had to grind whole beans themselves. Commercial roasted beans finally appeared in the mid-1800s when brands like Folgers and Arbuckle's entered the market. For people used to roasting beans by hand, this was a major improvement in convenience. Grinding the beans was still required, but Arbuckle's managed to make the task more appealing. As noted by HistoryNet, the company placed a peppermint stick inside every bag. All a cook had to do was call out, "Who wants the candy?" And there was no shortage of volunteers ready to grind the daily batch. Here are the coffee brands to use for a historically accurate flavor. If you try to picture the original aroma of authentic cowboy coffee, you might imagine wood smoke drifting from the campfire in the outdoors mixed into every cup. But what about the coffee itself? What type of modern blend would match what cowboys once drank? Flavored grocery store coffees like hazelnut or vanilla would not reflect the historical taste. In the early 1800s, many cups of cowboy coffee probably had a slightly burnt flavor. This happened because most beans were sold green, and cooks had to roast them by hand before grinding. Roasting beans evenly at home, especially outside over an open fire, was difficult. It was easy for the beans to darken too quickly, as noted by Pittsburgh Magazine. Two businessmen recognized this problem. James Folger in California and John Arbuckle in Texas began selling roasted coffee commercially, making life much easier for everyday drinkers and trail cooks. Folgers became a household name that continues today. Arbuckles also became extremely popular in frontier camps, and the brand is still available for those who want to experience coffee similar to what cowboys enjoyed in the Old West. Techniques for making cowboy coffee vary. Cowboy coffee became popular largely because of how straightforward it was. All the cook needed was water, fire, and ground coffee. Heat it, mix it, and wait. However, results could vary a lot on the frontier. As Sprudge explains, trail cooks didn't have thermometers, timers, or precise measuring tools. They worked fast, feeding large crews, so exact ratios were rarely consistent. Over many years, cooks developed little techniques to improve the taste. Some added a pinch of salt to soften acidity. Others placed the coffee grounds in a clean cloth or sock before boiling to help contain the sediment. Not everyone agreed on the best approach. Some cooks believed the coffee should go in before the water reached a boil, while others insisted it should be added after, according to Sprudge. Modern coffee makers attempting cowboy coffee at home have refined these methods while keeping the original simplicity. The roastery suggests heating water to about 200 degrees Fahrenheit, before adding the grounds and using a ratio of 2 tablespoons of coffee for every 8 ounces of water. They also advise letting the coffee steep gently away from direct flame rather than continuously boiling it, which helps preserve flavor without losing the rustic cowboy style. Adding eggshells helps cut the coffee's acidity. Eggs were not only part of a traditional cowboy breakfast, they sometimes became part of the coffee itself. Some cooks added crushed eggshells directly to their cowboy coffee. According to Sprudge, eggshells are alkaline, so they can help soften the acidity of the brew. Homegrounds also explains that eggshells help the spent grounds bind together, which reduces the chance of loose grounds floating in the cup. This method also gave ranch crews a practical way to reuse leftover shells from breakfast. Homegrounds notes that the cook could simply use whatever eggshells were left from the meal. The shells were lightly crushed and mixed with the coffee grounds before adding the water. Cowboys were not the only ones who tried this approach. Swedish immigrants in the United States made Swedish egg coffee, described by the Spruce Eats, using a whole raw egg with shell optional, blended into the grounds before brewing. This was also believed to create a smoother, cleaner tasting cup, and modern testing supports the idea. Cooks Illustrated reported that when they intentionally overcooked coffee and then stirred in a clean crushed eggshell briefly, the final brew was noticeably less bitter. Here are some tricks for keeping grounds out of your cup. Even though cowboys lived rough and practical lives, they still didn't want coffee filled with floating grounds. Since cowboy coffee wasn't brewed with a filter, stray grounds in the cup were a constant challenge. Over time, cooks created different methods to help the grounds settle after brewing. One of the most common solutions was to pour a bit of cold water into the pot once the coffee finished boiling. Cowboy cook Kent Rollins, who prefers using a long spout kettle, pours cold water directly down the spout to help push any loose grounds back down. If grounds collect along the inside rim of the pot, he suggests wiping that area gently with a damp towel. A similar method recommended by Driftaway Coffee is to sprinkle a small amount of cold water directly onto the top of the grounds after brewing. This helps them fall to the bottom before serving. Some cooks tried avoiding the loose grounds problem entirely by putting the coffee inside a clean cloth or sock before boiling. Rollins, however, does not support the sock idea, as noted by Sprudge, and questions who might have used that sock before it ended up in the pot. Using coarse ground coffee is a key to smoothness. People who take coffee seriously know that grind size directly affects the end result. A fine grind works beautifully for espresso because the pressure forces water through quickly. But if you tried that same fine grind in a percolator, the result would become overly heavy and thick. Every brewing method demands its own grind size to achieve balance. Cowboy coffee holds its own category in this discussion. The roastery notes that cowboy coffee is somewhat similar to French press coffee, only without the filter screen. Meanwhile, I Need Coffee compares cowboy coffee to the much older tradition of Turkish coffee, although cowboy coffee is less delicate and less finely prepared. The comparison shows why grind size matters so much. Turkish coffee uses extremely fine grounds, almost like powder, which creates a concentrated and dense drink. French press brewing uses a very coarse grind to keep the brew clearer and to prevent sediment from dominating the cup. So what did working trail cooks actually use in the 1800s? History strongly suggests that early ranch cooks relied on coarser grinds. They roasted and ground beans by hand at camp, and since adjustable grinders and precision settings did not exist yet, a coarse grind was far easier to achieve quickly. On long cattle drives and during early frontier travel, time and practicality mattered far more than perfect uniformity. Modern cowboy coffee recipes mirror this historical reality. Coarse ground beans help reduce sediment in the cup, allow the grounds to settle more efficiently, and create a smoother, more balanced taste. Cowboy cook Kent Rollins also emphasizes that using a coarse grind is one of the most important steps for making good cowboy coffee even today, just as it likely was on the open range over 140 years ago. Here's how to make great cowboy coffee with different roasts. During the frontier era, cowboys didn't have the luxury of selecting special blends or premium roasts. They simply drank whatever coffee the trail cook could secure. True West notes that before the Civil War, Obtaining real coffee at all could be a challenge in many Western regions. Supply chains were inconsistent, merchants were limited, and shipments took time to arrive at remote towns or cattle camps. As the 19th century progressed, industrial roasting and packaging technology improved dramatically. This helped shift coffee from an unpredictable commodity into something more standardized and easier to distribute. Two major names rose to prominence during this time: Folgers and Arbuckle's. Arbuckle's Arabia blend, in particular, became strongly linked to cattle drives, chuck wagons, and ranch life. Many historians even refer to Arbuckle's as the original cowboy coffee. In modern times, we have far more choices than ranch hands ever did. Cowboy cook Kent Rollins continues to use medium roast Folgers out of respect for tradition, but he points out that today's home brewer can pick any roast they prefer: dark, light, specialty, single origin. None of those distinctions mattered much to most cowboys in the 1800s. This opens the door to a follow-up question. Should different roasts be handled differently when preparing cowboy-style steeped coffee today? Coffee expert James Hoffman suggests yes. When making a Norwegian-style steeped coffee, similar to cowboy coffee where grounds are added directly to just boiled water, he recommends adjusting your cooling time depending on roast level. Dark roasts should have the water rest for 3 to 5 minutes after boiling before adding the coffee. Light roasts, which often benefit from slightly hotter water and higher acidity retention, only need about a minute of cooling. Historically, cowboys lacked that kind of precision. They worked outdoors with fire, wind, unpredictable heat, and constant movement. Today, however, when recreating cowboy coffee in a home kitchen or controlled outdoor setting, we can apply modern knowledge to get results that still honor old traditions, but with far more nuance and consistency than most trail cooks ever had the time or equipment to achieve. The American West isn't the only place that makes cowboy coffee. Cowboy coffee has gained a nostalgic charm today, partly because it represents the rugged independence of the Old West. With nothing more than a pot and an open flame, a cowboy could make a satisfying cup of coffee almost anywhere. The method was simple, accessible, and dependable on long drives, trail camps, and isolated ranch locations. At its core, coffee in any form is still just water meeting ground beans. And while we've invented countless modern tools, drippers, percolators, espresso machines, French presses, AeroPresses, the basic concept hasn't changed. Cowboy coffee reflects one of the most direct, primitive versions of this concept. Many cultures around the world have traditions that are remarkably similar. Turkish coffee, for example, is often said to be the earliest documented brewing method, according to History Cooperative. It uses extremely fine grounds simmered directly in water with no filter at all, much like cowboy coffee. The difference is the precision and repetition. Turkish coffee is slowly heated and cooled several times and prepared in very small portions, 1 or 2 tiny cups at a time, forming a thick, rich result. Norway also developed a version of open pot-style coffee known as coca coffee. This method resembles cowboy coffee, but with a slightly more structured, indoor-friendly approach. Coffee grounds are stirred directly into water that has been heated to boiling, then the pot is removed from heat and left to steep. Traditional coca coffee kettles include a built-in strainer in the spout to help trap loose grounds before pouring, showing how some cultures solved the same problems cowboys faced, just in a calmer environment. What these global examples reveal is that cowboy coffee wasn't an odd improvisation. It was part of a larger brewing family. Many regions and time periods relied on simple, fire-based techniques before industrial equipment existed. Cowboy coffee is simply America's frontier version of an ancient and widespread brewing tradition shaped by cattle trails, harsh landscapes, and the need for steady energy far from civilization. Cowboy coffee wasn't just a drink. It was part of the heartbeat of the frontier. It kept tired riders awake through the long trails, warmed freezing hands at sunrise, and became one of the simple comforts that connected cowhands, pioneers, cooks, and travelers across the Old West. It was rough, it was practical, and it told a story with every pot that boiled over those campfires. Today, even with all the fancy grinders, digital kettles, and gourmet blends we have, There's still something unforgettable about the old cowboy way. No machines, no filters, just fire, beans, and grit. The taste might surprise you, and it might even make you appreciate how much history was poured into every cup. Thanks for watching. And if you love learning the real truth about the Old West, make sure you hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below. Would you try a cup of real cowboy coffee if you had the chance?